The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Subject line, Board Decision Confidential. I opened it in my office at Westfield Technologies, staring at the words that ended 14 years of my life in 2 paragraphs. Dear Cameron Walsh, after careful consideration, the board has decided to restructure your position. Your employment will be terminated effective November 30th. We appreciate your contributions and wish you well in future endeavors. No phone call, no meeting, no explanation, just a corporate goodbye dressed up in sterile language that meant nothing. I read it 3 times, then closed my laptop and sat in the silence of my corner office on the 9th floor, looking out at downtown Seattle as rain streaked down the windows. My name is Cameron Walsh. I'm 47 years old, and until that moment, I believed loyalty meant something in business. I'd spent 14 years at Westfield Technologies, a software security company I'd helped build from 30 employees to over 400. I started as a senior developer in 2010, worked my way up to chief technology officer by 2016, and spent the last 8 years making sure our encryption systems were the best in the industry. I earned $240,000 a year, lived in a modest house in Ballard, and never once thought about leaving. The company's founder, Stuart Briggs, hired me personally back when Westfield operated out of a converted warehouse near the docks. Stuart was 52 then, a former IBM engineer who'd risked everything to build something of his own. He used to say I was the best hire he'd ever made, that my security protocols were what separated us from every other tech company trying to sell cloud protection. We weren't just colleagues. We were friends. At least I thought we were. Stuart retired in 2022 at age 64, selling his majority stake to a venture capital firm called Apex Holdings. The new board brought in a CEO named Preston Chambers, 39 years old, Harvard Business School, 3 previous tech companies under his belt. Preston had slicked back hair, designer suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He talked constantly about optimizing operations and maximizing shareholder value, phrases that meant nothing to the engineers who actually built the products. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. For 2 years after Preston took over, I watched the company change. The culture shifted from innovation to cost-cutting. Good people were let go and replaced with cheaper contractors. Preston hired his former business school roommate, Todd Garrison, as Chief Operating Officer, paying him $280,000 despite Todd having 0 experience in software security. Together, they formed a tight alliance on the board, making decisions without consulting the technical teams who actually understood the products. I spoke up at board meetings, politely at first, then more forcefully as I watched our security standards slip. I warned that cutting corners on encryption protocols would eventually cause problems. I showed data proving our customer retention was dropping because of service quality issues. Preston would nod, say he appreciated my input, then do exactly what he wanted anyway. 3 months before that termination email, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I was reviewing server logs on a Sunday night, checking routine security protocols, when I noticed unusual file transfers from our main development server. Large amounts of data moving to an external IP address I didn't recognize. The transfers happened every Friday night at 11:30 p.m., like clockwork, going back 6 weeks. I traced the IP address to a server farm in Virginia. Then I dug deeper, following digital breadcrumbs through proxy servers and encrypted tunnels, using skills I'd developed over 20 years in cybersecurity. What I found was a shell company called Nexus Digital Solutions, registered in Delaware 3 months earlier. And when I looked at the business filings, 2 names appeared as board members: Preston Chambers and Todd Garrison. They were stealing our source code, our proprietary encryption algorithms that I'd spent years developing. The same code that made Westfield worth $340 million according to our last valuation. They were copying everything to their own servers, preparing to launch a competing company using technology they didn't create and didn't own. I didn't confront them. That's not how you handle something like this. Instead, I did what any good security engineer would do. I documented everything, I created a hidden partition on a secure server that only I could access, copying every piece of evidence. Server logs, file transfer records, business registration documents, email exchanges between Preston and Todd discussing the new venture. I even found messages where Preston joked about bleeding Westfield dry before we jump ship. I also installed monitoring software on the development servers, the kind that's invisible unless you know exactly where to look. Every time Preston or Todd accessed our systems, I got a notification with a complete record of what they did. For 3 months, I watched them systematically copy our entire technology stack while pretending to run the company. But I didn't go to the board, because when I looked at who actually sat on that board, I realized the problem was bigger than just Preston and Todd. 4 of the 7 board members were Apex Holdings appointees, all venture capital guys who cared more about quick profits than long-term stability. They wouldn't believe me over their golden boy CEO. Or worse, they might already know and be part of it. So I waited, and I prepared, because I learned long ago that in business, like in security systems, timing is everything. You don't show your hand until you're ready to play all your cards at once. The termination email was their first mistake. They thought removing me would eliminate the one person who might discover what they were doing. What they didn't realize was that I'd already found everything, documented everything, and prepared for exactly this scenario. That Thursday evening, after reading the termination email, I didn't pack my office. I didn't send angry messages to Preston or Todd. I simply locked my computer, went home to my house in Ballard, and called my attorney, Lauren Pierce. I'd worked with Lauren on contract reviews over the years, and I knew she was tough, smart, and didn't back down from fights. "Cameron," she said when she answered at 6:15 p.m. "What's going on?" "I need to see you tomorrow morning," I said. "I have a situation that needs immediate attention. Bring your intellectual property specialist if you have one." "How serious are we talking?" "Corporate theft. Millions of dollars. And I have proof." Lauren was quiet for a moment. "My office, 8 a.m. Don't discuss this with anyone else." That night, I barely slept. I kept going over every detail in my mind, making sure I hadn't missed anything. The evidence was solid. The timeline was clear. The documentation was irrefutable. But taking on a CEO and a board of directors wasn't like fixing a security bug. This was going to get messy, expensive, and public. At 7:30 a.m. Friday morning, I backed up all my evidence to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers, using accounts that had no connection to Westfield or my personal email. Then I copied everything to 2 physical hard drives, storing one in a safety deposit box at my bank on Capitol Hill and keeping the other in my home safe. Years of working in cybersecurity had taught me the importance of redundant backups. Lauren's office was in a building on 4th Avenue, 12th floor, with a view of Elliott Bay. When I arrived at 8 a.m., she was waiting with another attorney named Bryce Coleman, a specialist in intellectual property law. Bryce was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, but his reputation for handling tech theft cases was well known in Seattle legal circles. I spent the next 3 hours walking them through everything. The file transfers, the shell company, the business registrations, the email exchanges. I showed them server logs with timestamps, proving exactly when Preston and Todd accessed our systems. I showed them the incorporation documents for Nexus Digital Solutions, filed just weeks after Preston became CEO. I showed them the messages where they discussed their plans. Bryce took notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen moving constantly. When I finished, he sat back and let out a long breath. "This is a federal case," he said. "Economic espionage, theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty. We're talking potential criminal charges on top of civil liability." "What are Cameron's options?" Lauren asked. Bryce tapped his pen on the desk. "We could go to the board, but that's risky. If any of them are involved or complicit, they'll circle the wagons and bury this. We could go to the FBI, but federal investigations take time, and they might seize all the evidence, which means Cameron loses control of the narrative." "What's the third option?" I asked. Bryce smiled slightly. "We file a lawsuit Monday morning. Not against Preston and Todd personally, but against Nexus Digital Solutions for theft of trade secrets. We request an immediate temporary restraining order to freeze their assets and prevent them from using any of the stolen code. We attach all your evidence as exhibits, which makes it part of the public record. Then we hold a press conference and let the court of public opinion do some of our work for us. Preston will claim I'm a disgruntled employee making false accusations, I said. He can claim whatever he wants, Lauren replied. But server logs don't lie. Timestamps don't lie. Business registration documents don't lie. And once this becomes public, the Westfield board will have to investigate, or they'll be liable for allowing it to continue. There's one more thing, Bryce said. Your termination email. They fired you effective November 30th, which is 2 weeks from now. That means you're still technically employed, which gives you certain protections. If they try to claim you stole company data or violated confidentiality agreements, we can argue you were performing your duties as Chief Technology Officer by investigating suspicious activity. I thought about that. So the timing actually works in our favor. Perfectly, Bryce said. They fired you to get rid of a witness, but they haven't actually gotten rid of you yet. We spent the rest of Friday preparing the lawsuit. Bryce's firm had a team of paralegals who worked through the weekend, drafting a 47-page complaint with 200 pages of exhibits. Every server log, every email, every business document I'd collected went into that filing. The lawsuit named Nexus Digital Solutions, Preston Chambers, and Todd Garrison as defendants. We requested $85 million in damages, the estimated value of the stolen intellectual property, plus punitive damages to be determined by a jury. Monday morning, November 18th, at 8:30 a.m., we filed the lawsuit in King County Superior Court. By 9 a.m., we'd served Preston and Todd with copies at the Westfield offices. By 10 a.m., we were standing in front of reporters at a press conference Lauren had arranged at her firm's building. Good morning, Lauren began, speaking into a cluster of microphones from local news stations. We're here today to announce a lawsuit against Nexus Digital Solutions and its principals for theft of trade secrets valued at over $85 million. My client, Cameron Walsh, served as Chief Technology Officer at Westfield Technologies for 14 years. During his tenure, he developed proprietary encryption technology that forms the core of Westfield's business. Recently, Mr. Walsh discovered that the company's CEO and COO were systematically copying this technology to start a competing business. She held up a bound copy of the lawsuit. The evidence is extensive and irrefutable. Server logs showing hundreds of unauthorized file transfers. Emails discussing plans to jump ship after stealing the technology. Business registration documents proving the defendants formed their company while still employed at Westfield. This isn't a case of corporate competition. This is theft, plain and simple. Bryce stepped forward. We're requesting a temporary restraining order to freeze Nexus Digital Solutions assets and prevent them from using any technology stolen from Westfield. We're also calling on the Westfield Board of Directors to conduct a full investigation and take immediate action to protect the company's interests. The reporters shouted questions. I stood quietly behind Lauren and Bryce, letting them handle the media. But one reporter from the Seattle Times called out directly to me. Mr. Walsh, Westfield terminated your employment. Do you think this lawsuit is retaliation? I stepped forward to the microphones. I was fired because I discovered what they were doing. The termination email is dated last Thursday, just days after I began collecting evidence of the theft. This isn't retaliation. This is accountability. By noon, the story was trending on local news sites. By 3 p.m., it had been picked up by TechCrunch and the Wall Street Journal. By evening, it was the lead story on Seattle's TV news broadcasts. The headline on King 5's website read, Westfield Technologies CEO accused of stealing millions in trade secrets. My phone started ringing that afternoon. Former colleagues from Westfield, some supportive, others confused. Reporters requesting interviews. Recruiters from other tech companies asking if I was looking for new opportunities. I ignored most of them, letting Lauren handle media requests through official statements. But one call I did take. It came at 6:30 p.m. Monday evening from Stuart Briggs, the company's founder. Cameron, Stewart's voice was tight with anger. "I just heard about the lawsuit. Tell me it's not true. Tell me Preston didn't do this." "It's true, Stewart. Every word of it. I have proof." Stewart was quiet for a long moment. "I sold that company to Apex because they promised to grow it to protect what we built. I trusted them. I trusted Preston. He betrayed all of us," I said. "But especially you. You spent 30 years building Westfield, and he was planning to steal it and sell it to competitors." "What can I do?" Stewart asked. "I still own 3% of the company. I still have contacts on the board. Right now, demand an emergency board meeting. Demand a full investigation. And most importantly, demand that Preston and Todd be suspended immediately pending the investigation's outcome." "Consider it done," Stewart said. "I'm calling every board member tonight." The temporary restraining order hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning, November 20th, at 9 a.m. in Judge Barbara Thornton's courtroom. Judge Thornton had a reputation for being thorough and fair, with a background in corporate law before becoming a judge. That background would matter when she reviewed the technical evidence. Preston and Todd showed up with 3 attorneys from one of Seattle's biggest corporate law firms, Keller and Associates. Their lead attorney, Hugh Keller himself, was a man in his 60s with silver hair and a reputation for defending Fortune 500 companies. His hourly rate was $1,200. The courtroom was packed with reporters, Westfield employees, and interested observers from the tech community. I sat at the plaintiff's table between Lauren and Bryce, watching as Preston and Todd took their seats across the aisle. Preston's expensive suit looked rumpled, and Todd kept whispering urgently to their attorneys. Judge Thornton entered at 9 a.m. sharp. "Please be seated. We're here on the matter of Walsh versus Nexus Digital Solutions. Mr. Coleman, you're requesting a temporary restraining order." Bryce stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We have evidence that the defendants systematically stole trade secrets from Westfield Technologies over a 6-month period while serving as the company's CEO and COO. We're requesting that the court freeze Nexus Digital Solutions assets and prevent them from using any technology stolen from Westfield." Hugh Keller stood immediately. "Your Honor, this is a frivolous lawsuit filed by a disgruntled employee who was terminated for cause. My clients deny all allegations and—" "Mr. Keller," Judge Thornton interrupted, "I've read the complaint and reviewed the exhibits. This doesn't appear frivolous. Let's proceed with evidence." For the next 2 hours, Bryce walked the court through the documentation. He presented server logs showing file transfers from Westfield's development servers to external IP addresses. He showed business registration documents proving Preston and Todd formed Nexus Digital Solutions while still employed at Westfield. He displayed email exchanges where they discussed their plans. The most damaging evidence was a message Preston sent to Todd on October 3rd. "Grab the encryption modules tonight. That's the last major piece we need. Once Cameron is gone, nobody else there understands the architecture well enough to notice what we took." Judge Thornton leaned forward. "Mr. Keller, do your clients dispute the authenticity of these emails?" Hugh Keller stood reluctantly. "Your Honor, we'd need time to verify. The emails came from your client's Westfield company accounts," Judge Thornton said. "The server logs show they accessed and copied files. The business documents show they formed a competing company while employed. What exactly are you disputing?" Keller had no good answer. "Your Honor, we request a continuance to properly review the evidence." "Denied. Based on the evidence presented, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order. Nexus Digital Solutions assets are frozen. The defendants are prohibited from using, selling, or distributing any technology that originated from Westfield Technologies. This order is effective immediately and will remain in place pending a full hearing on the merits." She looked directly at Preston and Todd. "Gentlemen, if you violate this order, you'll be held in contempt. Do you understand?" They both nodded, Preston's face pale, Todd staring at the table. "We'll schedule a full hearing for January 6th, Judge Thornton said. "Court is adjourned." I walked out of that courtroom feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Vindication. Not satisfaction exactly, because the fight wasn't over, But the truth was out, and it was documented in court records that anyone could read. That afternoon, the Westfield board held an emergency meeting. Stuart Briggs had made good on his promise, contacting every board member and demanding action. By 4 p.m., Westfield issued a press release. The board of directors has placed CEO Preston Chambers and COO Todd Garrison on indefinite administrative leave pending an investigation into serious allegations of misconduct. The board has retained outside counsel to conduct a comprehensive review. By Friday, November 22nd, both Preston and Todd had resigned from Westfield rather than face the internal investigation. Their resignations didn't affect the lawsuit, which was proceeding regardless. But it meant they could no longer hide behind the company's resources or claim they were acting in Westfield's interests. The full hearing in January lasted 3 days. Bryce presented overwhelming evidence: 300 pages of server logs, 50 emails, business documents, and testimony from Westfield's IT staff who confirmed they'd been ordered to grant Preston and Todd unusual levels of system access. Hugh Keller tried to argue that the file transfers were legitimate business activities, but he couldn't explain why those files ended up on servers owned by Nexus Digital Solutions. On January 10th, Judge Thornton issued her ruling. The court finds that defendants Preston Chambers and Todd Garrison, while serving as executives at Westfield Technologies, engaged in systematic theft of trade secrets. The evidence is clear and convincing. The defendants copied proprietary encryption technology valued at $85 million and attempted to use it for personal gain through Nexus Digital Solutions. She ordered Nexus Digital Solutions permanently dissolved, all stolen technology destroyed, and awarded Westfield Technologies $85 million in compensatory damages plus $40 million in punitive damages. Since I'd assigned my claims to Westfield in exchange for a percentage of any recovery, the company received the full award. But Preston and Todd didn't have $125 million. They'd spent most of their available cash setting up Nexus Digital Solutions and hiring developers. The judgment would follow them for years, destroying their credit, their reputations, and their ability to work in the tech industry. The story made national news. Forbes ran an article titled, "How a CTO's Digital Breadcrumbs Caught Executive Thieves." Wired published a piece about corporate espionage in the tech industry, using our case as the primary example. My LinkedIn profile, which I rarely used, was suddenly getting messages from companies offering jobs, speaking opportunities, and consulting contracts. Stuart Briggs called me in February. "Cameron, the board wants to offer you your job back. Chief Technology Officer, $280,000 salary, plus stock options and a seat on the board of directors." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No. Stuart sounded surprised. "I gave Westfield 14 years, Stuart. The best years of my career. I built security systems that protected millions of users. And when I discovered theft, when I tried to protect the company, I got fired. The board that hired Preston is still mostly intact. Apex Holdings still controls the company. Why would I go back to that?" Stuart was quiet. "What will you do?" "I'm starting my own company, Walsh Security Systems. Small, focused, built on the principle that loyalty and ethics actually matter. I've already got 3 clients lined up, companies that followed the case and want someone they can trust." "Can I invest?" Stuart asked. I smiled. "Let me send you the paperwork." 6 months after that courtroom victory, my company had 12 employees and 15 clients. We specialized in security audits for mid-sized tech companies, the exact market I understood best. Revenue was modest but growing steadily. More importantly, I was building something that reflected my values, not someone else's quarterly profit targets. I heard through industry contacts that Preston took a job at a startup in Austin, Texas, but got fired after 3 months when they discovered his background. Todd was working as a project manager at a construction company in Spokane, as far from tech as he could get. Their judgment debt followed them everywhere, a $125 million reminder that some shortcuts aren't worth taking. The financial settlement with Westfield was finalized in March. Because I'd assigned my claims in exchange for 15% of any recovery, I received $18.75 million after legal fees. I paid off my house in Ballard, set up college funds for my sister's 3 kids, donated $2 million to a nonprofit that taught coding to underprivileged students, and invested the rest conservatively. Money doesn't solve every problem, but it does provide options. Sometimes former Westfield colleagues reach out, asking how I knew to document everything, how I stayed calm during those 3 months of watching Preston and Todd steal from the company. The truth is simpler than they expect. I didn't stay calm. I was furious every single day. But fury without strategy is just noise. What mattered was building an airtight case, gathering irrefutable evidence, and waiting for the right moment to act. Preston and Todd thought they were smarter than everyone else. They thought their Harvard degrees and venture capital connections made them untouchable. They thought removing me would eliminate the threat. What they didn't understand was that in cybersecurity, everything leaves a trace. Every file transfer, every email, every login creates a record. And if you know where to look, those records tell stories that executives can't talk their way out of. A year after the lawsuit, I was invited to speak at a cybersecurity conference in San Francisco. The topic was corporate ethics and technical accountability. I stood on stage in front of 400 security professionals and told them the story. The theft, the documentation, the courtroom battle. The lesson isn't about revenge, I said toward the end of my talk. It's about responsibility. When you work in security, you're the last line of defense against people who think rules don't apply to them. Sometimes those people are hackers trying to break in from the outside. But sometimes they're executives sitting in corner offices, stealing from the very company they're supposed to protect. Your job is to catch both. The applause was long and genuine. Afterward, at least 20 people came up to share their own stories of corporate misconduct, of evidence they'd collected, of fights they were afraid to start. I gave them all the same advice. Document everything, find good lawyers, and trust that the truth has a way of surfacing when you give it enough light. These days, I don't think much about Preston or Todd. They made their choices and they're living with the consequences. I focus on building Walsh security systems, on hiring good people who share my values, on doing work that matters. The office is smaller than my old corner suite at Westfield, but it's mine. The team is smaller, but they're loyal. The stakes are lower, but the satisfaction is higher. Sometimes betrayal isn't the end of something. Sometimes it's the beginning. The moment that forces you to decide what you actually stand for and whether you have the courage to fight for it. I got fired on a Thursday afternoon because I discovered the truth. But that termination email, the one they thought would silence me, ended up being the first line of evidence in a case that destroyed them. They thought pushing me out quietly would solve their problem. They were wrong. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.